Hello, this is Virtual the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Bishops are usually considered a less valuable piece than rooks. I'm not here to overturn any established common sense in the game of chess. A bishop is certainly a less powerful piece than a rook on average. However, pieces don't exist in isolation and need to be considered in the context of the game and the interactions with other pieces. A pair of bishops synergise with each other in a way that makes the pair potentially much stronger than a rook. This is especially the case earlier in the game, for instance the middle game, when there are still a lot of pieces on the board. Rooks often can't exert their influence while bishops slip through the diagonal cracks of the opponent's line of pawns. This phenomenon was well demonstrated by a game I played today. Please enjoy! So let's have a quick look at the review. So we both started off very evenly, and then the opponent makes a blunder, which we'll see in context, and I was able to maintain my advantage for the rest of the game. So I played reasonably well, 85% accuracy, opponent around 80%. You know, we both, I think, played reasonably accurate moves, though my opponent did have relatively more inaccuracies, and that one blunder, however, made the big difference. So let's now have a look at the analysis. So I played with the white pieces, opponent black, and as usual, I played e4, opponent plays e5, and knight c3, beginning of the Vienna game, opponent plays knight f6. So f4, the Vienna Gambit. And I always hope that they will take the Gambit, because that's definitely bad for black. Now in this case, they didn't. They played d6, so definitely not the best response. D5 is the best response, but D6 is potentially quite good. And I actually realized this time round that I always actually don't play the best line, because I almost always play bishop C4 to get the light square bishop out, and my plan would be to create that chain of pawns the next turn. However, this actually just brings us back to equality. And you know, apparently playing knight f3 maintains the advantage. So I had a closer look on why that was the case this time round. And the reason for that is if I play knight f3, let's say opponent plays a bishop move, that now allows me to strike in the center. So 3 pawns now on the 4th rank, and this is potentially good. So this sort of capture doesn't work. You know, queen can come out. And you know, I now have that extra defender, extra attacker on that pawn, and this is what allows me to maintain that advantage. And as you can see, the advantage potentially continues to move ahead if the opponent doesn't play very accurately. So next time round, yeah, I'll definitely play, I think, knight f3 after d6. However, that's not what I did. I played the bishop move, opponent played bishop e7, I now play d3, so that was my whole plan, to create that chain of pawns. Not unexpected, opponent plays bishop g4, I block with knight f3, they now play knight c6, and here I think the best move is short castles. However, I decided that in this move I would close the door on that bishop with f5. So I've created now a line of demarcation across the board, and their bishop is on the wrong side of it, and potentially this allows me to attack the bishop a little bit later. Opponent plays the best move, so knight d4, which is an annoying move because, you know, now there's 2 attackers on the knight. The opponent's knight also attacks the c2 pawn, which of course comes as a fork between the king and the rook. So that's a kind of an annoying move. And of course, I can't just straight up capture because it's pinned to my queen, but that's okay. So here I short castles. You notice the advantage is to black at the moment. They capture back with pawn, opponent forced to move their bishop back. And here I am now slightly ahead again. Need to move my knight back to defend the king because the king is now a little bit exposed with the open g file. Opponent plays d5. Now apparently this is okay. So apparently that is the best move according to Stockfish. However, I couldn't quite see why that would be the case because I thought if I did that, the opponent could capture back and you know, and then I can't really capture back there because, you know, the queen would just capture. So I thought that didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I actually decided to retreat the bishop to b3, and apparently that was a mistake. So I started back to black, but that allows me to keep vision on the weak f7 pawn. Anyway, that was my logic here. I really didn't want to lose my bishop pair. The opponent now plays bishop c5 with check, and I thought, that's okay. Just slip the king to h1. Is that, yeah, apparently that's a little bit better. Okay, not too different, I suppose, between the two. Though that is annoying because, you know, it covers that entire diagonal. They now capture, and here I thought I can capture back. So now I sort of maintain that chain of pawns. The opponent plays knight g4, so I think moving to attack, you know, so this is a potentially problematic move. You know, that's also defended by the bishop, so potentially being forced to trade a rook for a minor piece. So that, I didn't really like that. Of course, you know, that could potentially be pinned. You know, if I make a move there and then there's a move, I could potentially lose the queen. I thought about, you know, is it better to block? But that doesn't quite end up quite working out because, again, that potentially ends up being pinned if I'm not careful. So eventually what I decided I had to do was I needed to give an extra defender to the f2 square, also take the queen out of that potential pin. So queen to e1. I thought, oh, how long? So almost 3 minutes, I think, for that move. Very happy to see that that was actually the best move. Now here the opponent did something that was a little bit unexpected for me because they made that move anyway, and this was the opponent's blunder. Because what happens here is I can capture, and I'm generally happy to trade 2 minor pieces for a rook, especially given that these were 2 very active pieces. And in doing so, the opponent also now loses the bishop pair. I was even more surprised when they decided to trade one further. Maybe they thought that they were ahead, and so they wanted to trade pieces. But now what are we left with? You know, I've got a much better pawn structure compared to black. I have a bishop that's developed. All the opponent's other pieces, so the 2 rooks and the queen, are still in their starting squares. I've got that diagonal open for the bishop. The queen is developed. So I thought I was pretty much ahead. And rook and 2 bishops versus 2 rooks, I was pretty sure that the bishop pair was stronger. And, you know, Stockfish agrees, as you can see, you know, almost plus six in my favor. Opponent moves their queen out. I found that was an interesting move. So here I decided to force a potential queen trade. So here I'm sort of directly threatening that pawn. I thought that the opponent would see this move with check, and if they did that, I would bring the queen back, effectively asking them to trade queens. And I was actually potentially quite happy to trade queens. That's what happened. So my prediction came true. Now, yes, you know, white is maybe a little bit up. Black is slightly improved, sorry, from the position before, but still, you know, without the opponent's queen, now it's just the 2 rooks still in their starting square. Again, I was pretty sure I was better in this position. So they start to sort of close things up. I move, and, you know, with me, I need to start pushing pawns. They do long castles, so centralizing a rook. Obviously, I need a defender for that pawn. So bishop, I thought bishop back was better. So Stockfish is fearless, putting the bishop forward. But I was just concerned that that bishop was going to end up getting trapped with these pawns moved forward. Opponent now plays rook onto the g file, so rook hg8, which makes sense. So potentially there would be a discovered check for me here. I'd play bishop e3. You'll notice my rook still hasn't moved at all. And my logic here was that there's a potential sort of push here, so with an attack on that pawn. They played b6, which, okay, I wasn't quite sure what that did, but that's okay. Now that allowed me to make the d4 move. Opponent captures, I capture back. So now I've got a dominant central control. The opponent plays g6, which is a very good move. So that is actually a very powerful move for the opponent because it comes with discovered check. So now I decide to play a bishop b3, directly attacking that rook. So yes, that comes with a discovered check, but I'm happy to trade a bishop for a rook because one rook versus rook and bishop, I should definitely be winning a piece up. So that forces them to move the rook out of the way. And here I do bring my bishop all the way to e6. So bishop e6, which now comes with check. And basically what I've done is look at the opponent's space. You know, the rooks barely have any room to move. They're boxed in by their pawns, while I'm gaining more and more space with my advancement of pawns. So they're forced to move the king out of the way. So the king is now no longer defending that rook. I'm not directly attacking at the moment, but that's good to know. Here I bring my other bishop, so bishop h6, now also attacking that rook. So again, driving the rook to another square. That isn't really a threat. Happy to trade. And now d5. And with d5, now I've got, now everything is protected. Everything is now protected. Capture. Here I thought a little while, do I take with pawn or take with bishop? Stockfish prefers taking with pawn, but I wanted these pawns to support each other. So I opted to capture the other way. Either way, I'm still substantially ahead. Opponent plays c6, which I suppose makes sense. Here, here I could have straight up captured that pawn because that pawn is basically hanging. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to open that that file. So what I opted to do was to give another check. King now moved out of the way. And here I brought my rook, finally a rook move to d1. Now with an extra defender. Captures, capture back with the pawn. So now the pawn is supported by the rook. And the goal is to try to push this as up. So this is now pass pawn, try to push to promotion. Opponent plays rook e2, which makes sense. So, rooks on the 7th and the 2nd are strong. Here I thought about it. Well, I thought, look, I can probably deal with this. Let's just straight up capture that hanging pawn. They capture back. That's okay. I move that pawn out of the way. Opponent now tries to put some pressure onto the light squared bishop. I move the bishop back. And my thinking here is that there is a potential discovered check. And the discovered check that is powerful because it allows the pawn basically to move 2 squares. And then it would be on the 7th rank. Once it's on the 7th rank, pawns are very powerful. I could probably force a trade of one of the rooks for the pawn, which would be excellent. Not afraid of that, even though it looks like there's 2 attackers, because that's still defended. That makes sense. I move to that square. They sort of make that attack. Yep, that's fine. Move the bishop back 1 more square. I'm happy for him to be greedy and gobble, because that rook is now kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's not really part of the game, and I now have that discovered check with a pawn move. King forced to move. Now a second pawn move. So that was basically 2 pawn moves. Now pawn is on the 7th rank, d7, and opponent is in trouble. So they thought for quite a long time for this move. Made probably the only move they could really do. However, it doesn't work because now I've got the dark square bishop. This is a strength with having, still the bishop pair. They finally, they try to move the rook out of the way. It doesn't matter. I queen. They have to capture back, effectively traded the pawn for a rook. So now rook, bishop pair versus rook, absolutely winning. And so there's a bit of shuffling here now. And basically, what can they really do? So obviously happy to capture. That's fine. I give a check, that obviously can't capture because of the check, which allows me to move the dark square bishop out of the way. Opponent makes a mistake because now these are lined up on the same rank, which means I can now I can now pin that rook to the king, effectively forcing a rook trade. So there we go. I need to potentially promote that pawn. The king is on the wrong side, and with still the bishop pair, I can definitely cover both promotion squares of the pawns. So here I just like to move the king across. Doesn't matter, you know, move the light square bishop, which now basically blocks that square. Start to move. That's all okay. And here I can trade a bishop for a pawn. If pawn goes here, they lose it. If they capture, that pawn is impossible to promote. And basically, with the bishop covering these squares, the king covering these squares, there's a force field. The king basically can't really move forward. And you know, now promote, very easy now. And at this point, the opponent resigns because with the next move, the opponent is either is forced to come here, and then that would be checkmate. So good game. I really enjoyed this game, and I think you know, I really love the bishop, the bishop pair, and you know how it almost bullies the rooks when there's still a lot of pawns on the board. So, GG. In the second half of the middle game, I had one rook and the bishop pair, while the opponent had both rooks. We both still had 7 pawns each. The opponent's rooks were boxed in by their own pawns, allowing me to extend my advantage, almost entirely through manoeuvring the bishop pair. Once my passed pawn reached the 7th rank, the game was effectively over, as my opponent was forced to trade a rook for a pawn. I hope you found this video interesting and useful, and thanks for watching.